Mr. Chairman, and thanks to everybody on the panel for your incredibly important work. I must say that fentanyl is not a new problem. I was U.S. Attorney in Southern District of Indiana from '01 to '07. I learned about fentanyl then, but yet we didn't talk about it much. The way we focused on methamphetamine and the dangers, for instance, to children, to the environment, what we're not talking about in the country is the danger. We talk about the overdoses, and now seeing the incredible increase in the overdoses, but can we talk a little bit about truly how just dangerous fentanyl is as a product? And I realize that this gets a little dicey because we use it in medical procedures, but I think having just been with law enforcement and firefighters this past weekend, there are dangers, are there not, Mr. Allen? And that's part of why you're doing training, and I want to ask you, Mr. Milione, can you talk to us about the dangers of fentanyl and why haven't we for a long time now talked about the incredible danger, because I don't think addicts and I don't think their families really have understood how incredibly dangerous it is.
I would say that in the law enforcement community, we have been. I would say since the recent surge in fentanyl, one of the key things that we've gotten out to the law enforcement community, largely following the lead of DEA, is making awareness to our personnel, to public safety personnel generally, what they could be encountering. For us operationally, it's changed how we do some of our work. One of the investigative techniques that we have done historically is to purchase drugs, whether that's online, DEA more domestically and online. We've stopped doing that because of the officer safety concerns that we have that could be inherent to an undercover agent buying drugs or a state and local officer buying drugs and not necessarily knowing what they're purchasing. There's also a challenge for us from the perspective of field testing. You know, gone are the days, glorified in a lot of television shows, of agents, you know, pulling out a pocket knife and probing a package of suspected drugs and putting that into a test kit. We, particularly at DHS and within DHS, Customs and Border Protection, has taken the lead on trying to examine and explore in field non-intrusive testing that would allow us to go to a place where agents don't have to physically open a package in order to determine what the substance is inside.
Mr. Milione, why is there a surge in fentanyl? What is your, and DEA, and I know you've been at this for a long time, but what would you say is the cause behind the surge that we've been seeing?
It's free market principles applied to the convergence of the opioid epidemic with massive profits that can be made, and cartels and criminal groups that are exploiting that. They see the opportunity, they aggressively market. With a small amount of fentanyl, they don't have to deal with the massive bulk of heroin, and they can get so much more profit out of that. So that's one of the things.
But they don't care that it's killing their customers?
In a perverse,
because there are more that just the pipeline?
I mean, it's very callous, but it's the cost of doing business, and I think some of the medical professionals on the panel would say, unfortunately, there's a perverse sometimes reaction when people overdose from high-potency fentanyl. It sometimes attracts more attention to that product.
Any idea what the stats are of how many cases we've been charging in the last year or two causing death? Federal cases where we are actually prosecuting drug traffickers for causing death.
I'd have to get back to you with specific statistics, but we are doing more and more of those around the country. Death-resulting cases, working with the U.S. Attorney's offices. We're engaging with the U.S. Attorneys, trying to get them to lean forward and work cooperatively on that. It's definitely what we're focused on.
And I guess going to Dr. Hori's comment, is part of the challenge maybe for a U.S. attorney is that coroners are not keeping track of and going into that much detail on the cause of death, which could be a problem I could see for a U.S. attorney. But should we be asking or requiring coroners to do a better job on that aspect?
I think it's a resource issue for coroners and medical examiners. When you look at the opioid epidemic and the number of deaths that they're now doing cases on, oftentimes they don't have the resources in their community to do that testing for fentanyl, or they don't have the labs, so they have to send it out, which is additional funding that they need.
Besides the labs, what kind of resources would they need to do the testing beside a heroin death or a fentanyl death?
So they would need the lab to distinguish the type of analog. I think also it's helpful to have the medical examiner do the family history and so forth to determine if this was an unintentional overdose, was this illegal fentanyl, where you can see the injection or other paraphernalia associated with it. But I'd say it's really the testing for the laboratory and the training as well.
Thank you. I yield back.